Hey Tessa, why are you crying?
Mike left me for the fifth time. I feel so abandoned and empty inside.
That's so sad to hear. I feel you, Tessa, but that on and off can't be healthy.
And that's the story of my life. I broke up with my ex-Ben 7 times before he left me.
I know you're in pain right now, but seeing a therapist really could
Really could be what?
help you.
Help me with what? I had a great childhood, so what am I gonna talk to a therapist about?
Hmm. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and today we talk about the most common symptoms of CPTSD. And a disclaimer up front here, I'm not a health professional, and the contents in this video are not to be understood as therapeutic medical instructions or advice. Everything I say here is based on research, my work with therapists, or personal experience. Also, news for today, I've created a free workbook to help you understand and re-regulate symptoms of childhood PTSD in 3 simple steps, and it shows you the best writing techniques to clear your mind, the best grounding skills and tools for re-regulating your nervous system, and a method to reconnect with yourself and others using the emotion wheel. If you want to grab a copy now, go to understandable-podcast.com and type in your mail. Then I send you your free workbook directly into your inbox. You find all the links for resources used in this video and the link to the workbook in the podcast description below. Today, let's start with the CPTSD definition. So first of all, what is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or childhood PTSD in other words? Now, the definition of CPTSD is that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that can develop if you experience long-term trauma, often during childhood. And often emotional neglect, so not the bad things that happen to you, as I said so many times in the previous episodes, lead to complex or childhood post-traumatic stress disorder related symptoms. These kind of symptoms that many of us experience as adults, which you will see later when we go more into depth. Now, I want to compare, to make that clear, CPTSD with the classical PTSD, because I think there is a lot of confusion beyond these terms, and especially in medical literature, CPTSD is a really novel term, so I want to make a distinction here. Basically summarize the differences between CPTSD and PTSD are that we are talking about recurring traumatic events in CPTSD and what we understand as one-time trauma in PTSD. So PTSD itself, post-traumatic stress disorder, describes a disruption of existing systems of emotional perception and processing. And as I said, those can be one-time traumatic events that leave a deep wound within person affected nervous system. Those events can, for example, be a car accident, could be war, and yes, war events are also reoccurring, but we are seeing war as a self. When, for example, a soldier went to war, then the war is the whole event. Then attacks, obviously, a heist, for example, when you experience that, those severe form of events, sexual or physical abuse can also be one. And particularly for children, PTSD events can be, for example, a parent dying, parent in jail, parent being mentally ill, a parent being addicted, violence in the family, divorce. Those are extremely severe events for children. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, often also described as childhood PTSD, and summarize what also is part of that is emotional neglect, which I made about an episode right here. I'll link that to you. And CPTSD is summarized interfering with the process of forming systems of emotional perception and processing. As I said, it's not the bad things that happened, but the good things that didn't happen that should have. That's technically emotional neglect. And while experiencing those emotional neglect as a child, it's often about neglecting specific emotional needs. For example, attention, love, acceptance, being seen, being heard, the freedom to experience and express all the given emotions we usually experience as children. And there is a big problem with complex trauma, which I want to address in today's episode. And the problem is that many people who are suffering from CPTSD related symptoms actually have no clue about it. Dr. Gabor Mate addresses this issue as well with some humor in the podcast with Andre Ducum, which I will now play here.
By the way, we can do this experiment here in this room if there's anybody brave enough. I had this really happy childhood, and then but I still got addicted, or I had autoimmune disease, or I had depression, or I had malignancy, or I had anxiety, or I have ADHD. But I had a happy childhood, and then I issue what I call the Happy Childhood Challenge, which is give me 3 minutes, and we'll see how. So if there's anybody here that had a really happy childhood, they want to find out just how miserable it really was, feel free to volunteer. It's always a learning experience.
And the same thing is also true for me, because before I started realizing that I may struggle with CPTSD-related symptoms, I also believed that my past, my childhood, were just great, and that I didn't have experienced anything like emotional neglect, for example. And I thought that I have relationship problems because those symptoms came up during my relationships, especially. I thought that my partners were somehow wrong for me. And I thought that I have some somatic struggles as well, that I have some physical pain that I couldn't explain, but I couldn't bring all the puzzle pieces together and understand where the things actually come from and where a red line here forms, how they're connected with each other. And this is why I want to show you those 10 signs today. I want to bring to you today the realization I want to deliver if you watch this episode or listen to this episode today here, that you will understand the connection between all of these symptoms and puzzle pieces and understand the whole picture, because what I see is that many people who have those symptoms, who have attachment difficulties, for example, who struggle with somatic symptoms, with depressive states, for example, they all have in common that they have those hidden CPTSD. And I want to make a connection, first of all, here between complex trauma and the central nervous system, because this is so important to understand. The symptoms we are experiencing, whether it be relationship issues, somatic symptoms, other unexplainable things that happen within us, those things actually come out of the wound which is stored within our central nervous system. And the case is that body and mind are completely connected. They are one. We can't separate them. We do that, especially in medical literature. Professionals do that. Doctors, psychiatrists, they try to separate those things. But the truth is that trauma actually is a wound in your mind, but it's stored within your body, as Peter Levine, for example, points out. So our central nervous system helps us to spot potential threats around. It's constantly doing that, obviously, because that's the job of the nervous system. But if we have a wound within the nervous system, I have experienced that specific people are a threat to you, or to me in this case, when it's your nervous system. Your nervous system will get super sensitive to other people because it tries to identify threats constantly. That's the way how the nervous system works, right? That's its job. It also did its job when we were really young. And back then, the job was even more important because we couldn't care for ourselves when we were young, when we were babies. And the thing is, and I said that before in other episodes, the nervous system today, when we have those wounds, when we have made those experiences as children that leave the wounds or left the wounds within us, then the nervous system today is reacting in the same proper way as adults in trigger situations as it did 30, 40, 50 years ago when we were young. So the nervous system reacts in precisely the perfect and correct way, but at the wrong place and time, because it's super sensitive to what happened back then. And there is a model which tries to explain this reaction, and it's called the polyvagal theory. I've talked about that quite a lot here on the channel, and it tries to explain the three states of the nervous system. So we have on the relaxed state is the so-called ventral vagal state. This is when you feel joy, when you are relaxed. Most of the times when you're alone, I guess, because that's also typical, and we come to that later now. Then we have the sympathetic flight or fight state, where you feel rage, anger, panic, those kind of things, where you just want to run away from other people, for example, want to flee out of a relationship. And then we have the dorsal vagal freeze state. And in that state, this is what we talk about shame, when we talk about dissociation, when we talk about numbness, shutdown, about hopelessness, those emotions that make us immobilized. And that's also pretty typical that we want to try to avoid the uncomfortable freeze states. And many people who have CPTSD related symptoms try to do that. So they often try to be alone, because alone they most of the times do not experience those states. And this is why today I want to present you 10 signs that you may have hidden CPTSD, even if you think to this point that your childhood was great. And without further ado, let's start with the first sign here, which is you often feel angry and distrustful towards the world. And I'm talking about that in general. Do you know this with people that you constantly believe that others will hurt you, don't want the best for you? Do you have that assumption when you think about other people? Because that is happening with people who have experienced specific events in their childhood, that they react distrustful in the world, often react angry when it comes to interacting with other people. And deep down, if you have that, you will assume that, for example, your partner, your friends, your family don't want the best for you. Or no, even worse, they want the worst for you. And they want to hurt you and criticize you, whatever you do. You might believe that it's always about them. It's never about you when it comes to needs, when it comes to emotions, and that makes you really angry when you think about other people. Being angry and distrustful can make you emotionally dysregulate. And on the other hand, it's not just making you emotionally dysregulate, it's also super exhausting and you live in a constant conflict with other people and with the world around you. Sign number 2, you're hiding sides of yourself, and that's because of constant shame. Toxic shame and guilt are classical big symptoms of CPTSD, and it's also interesting when we talk about shame that, and that's also true for me, many people never understood what shame actually is, and that it is shame and guilt that's holding them back. I've made a full episode about the toxic cycle of shame and guilt here, so make sure to watch that as well after this one to better understand this toxic cycle. When you have this shame, this underlying shame and a guilt-driven patterns, then you might feel the need to hide specific sides of yours. And often these are sides that you are less proud of and which were neglected as a child, or that you have been criticized for a lot as a child and maybe later on. If you find yourself having the symptom, you may then find yourself constantly performing in a certain role or in different situations. For example, you try to be the funny one, you try to be the strong one, you try to be the tough one, the not so sensitive one. And masking also plays a huge role here. It's not just a thing that happens in people with autism, for example, but it's also a thing in people with CPTSD. And this is caused by the constant feeling, as I said, of shame around those specific behaviors or preferences that you might have. And if you have this phenomenon that you're hiding sides of yourself and that you are ashamed of specific sides, then this can lead to a constant feeling of needing to be someone else to be accepted or avoid reaction or criticism. So you do that to avoid those things that you fear so much. And that's again extremely exhausting and makes you wish to be alone and not to be in a relationship, for example. And connected with that is sign number 3, you feel best and only feel free when you're alone. Now let me ask you one question here. If you could remove one stressor from your life right now, which one comes to your mind first? If the answer is humans, relationships, my partner, my parents, or something similar, then it's likely that you struggle with CPTSD symptoms here. Now, this feeling is, I would describe it as false freedom, because while alone, you might feel a sense of release and control that you lack in social situations. But on the other hand, we as human beings are social creatures. That means that we feel, sleep, and live better and safer with other people or in groups. That fact is confusing to people with CPTSD, and I also sometimes can't really believe it and feel a strong need to withdraw here, but it's actually the truth. And for most people who don't have CPTSD-related symptoms, that's normality. There is an underlying fear of getting hurt, of getting criticized, judged for behavior, for specific feelings, where in the end we feel ashamed about. We feel shame for specific parts of ourselves and need to hide them. And that's a super exhausting behavior again. Also, what also can happen here is that physical symptoms can occur, like stomach pain or pressure in our chest, in our throat, that make life super exhausting while being with other people. And by the way, this is not introversion, what we're talking about here. While introverts also enjoy alone time, this is not the same. You might feel anxious or unsafe in social settings. And introverts don't feel anxious or unsafe. They just enjoy the alone time, but not because of those reasons. Sign number 4. When you are criticized by your partner, by a close friend, you will feel hopeless and feel like the other person might leave you. This is a sensation you will experience in an acute trigger situation. For example, when you're in a fight with your partner, with a close friend, with someone you're dating, or with a family member. Now, let's say a loved one is really disappointed at you, is having a bad day, or is furious about something you've done. How will you react? Will you think, oh, yes, there is something unfavorable I have done, but he or she will still love me? Or will you think, oh boy, is he or she having a bad day today? If you react like this, that's amazing. No CPTSD on your radar so far. But if you think, oh hell, what did I do wrong? If you feel guilty, will feel full of shame and desperately looking for mistakes on your side, then this could be complex trauma here. Usually those kind of scenarios often trigger strong flashbacks moments or traumatic re-experiencing in many people with CPTSD. Then you will feel horrible, you feel depressive, empty inside, and you feel like you're at the mercy of your own emotions. That's a really typical example for a truly dysregulated state here. And again, if you want to learn to re-regulate exactly those states, then I recommend you the workbook I just created. You can download it for free on unexplainable-podcast.com. Sign number 5. You avoid close relationships or live in on-off relationships. If you experience this one, you might actively avoid getting too close to others or sabotage your relationships when they get deeper. That also can happen already in the start, that you keep some distance to someone you're just dating, or as well within your relationship that you're constantly in a push and pull dynamic. The fear of intimacy could be linked to an insecure avoidant attachment style here, and the cause for this behavior are early experiences of neglect or betrayal that might make closeness feel really unsafe for you. So you already felt unsafe emotionally, maybe also physically, as a small child. Now, this push and pull dynamic that you create here might make you crave for connection on the one hand, but then make you push people away when they get too close to you, which then creates a really confusing pattern within your relationships for the other person as well as for you, because you don't understand why you're doing that. Those push and pull dynamics, as well as on-off relationships or completely avoiding relationships, are super common for people with CPTSD and are definitely no healthy patterns. Someone with a secure and healthy bounding behavior would enter relationships or stay in it, but definitely makes a clear decision here. Sign number 6. You feel panicky if your partner or someone else talks about settling down together, about marriage or having children together. This one is a commitment causes panic trigger when the fear of commitment while discussion about marriage, about children, or even moving together can trigger anxiety or panic attacks. Now, this is happening because the fear of losing your own independence or the fear of being trapped in a relationship can be overwhelming to you. And therefore, you believe that within a close and settled relationship, you can't be independent anymore. So you can't be yourself, you can't do what you usually do, express your needs, express your emotions, you can't be alone. You always have to be careful which sides of yourself you might show. This fear can also, again, be linked to an insecure avoidant attachment style here. And usually this scenario is a clear indicator that someone is struggling with attachment problems and probably some childhood PTSD related symptoms. Sign number 7, you have unexplainable physical symptoms. You see one doctor after another because no one really knows what's wrong with you. Even doctors don't have answers for your symptoms. And these symptoms occur repeatedly in specific situations. For example, when you see your father, when you see your mother, when you go on a date, see your partner, or while phoning with someone, or at work, can be triggered by so many different situations. And then you start suddenly having this weird pain in your gut, in your stomach, in your throat, pressure in your chest. You start to sweat intensely. You sense you have this tingling, this sensation, this fatigue, because chronic fatigue can also be a phenomenon as well here, caused by the exhaustion in your chronic overall central nervous system. Not many doctors still know about CPTSD, and this is why no one is explaining it to you. To be fair, CPTSD is also a new thing this day in medical literature, but it's not understood by many people. These symptoms are actually caused by your body because your central nervous system reacts to potential threats or is constantly scanning the environment. So what you have to understand here that it's technically great that you have those somatic and physical symptoms because they are warning signs for you. But often the threats are already gone, but the trauma is still stored within your body, so you are not in an acute danger situation here. And now it's time to release the pain and re-regulate your nervous system. And to do that, as I said 2 times already, you can, for example, use the strategies and skills from our re-regulation resources book that you find in the description. Sign number 8, you feel like no one can really understand you and that you are really different than other people. All of the people around you may start or already started to have a family, to move together, even maybe long ago, but to you, this imagination, as I said on the other sign, just can cause panic, and it seems so confusing. You have thoughts like, I am just different, or I'm an alien. And then you might see yourself as fundamentally different from others, like a misfit, or someone who doesn't belong here. And this conception of oneself is also typically for people with autism, with borderline, with ADHD, or with sensory processing sensitivity, so for highly sensitive people. This feeling of isolation most of the time could also again stem from childhood experiences of neglect, of abuse, or not fitting in. And again, this feeling is closely connected to shame again, which is so typical for CPTSD. If you face this sign, then you're often confronted with a distorted sense of self, distorted self-image, and distorted identity that is usually part of complex trauma. Sign number 9, that it might be CPTSD even if you think your childhood was great. And that sign is something that many people might struggle with, and it's procrastination. If you are facing procrastination from time to time, you might be stuck in a stasis. And that means that you find yourself constantly putting things off, even important tasks, leading to a feeling of being stuck here. Procrastination can be just caused by laziness sometimes. Yeah, I think we all have that, those days where we can't get out of bed. But most of the times behind procrastination and behind real intense procrastination, chronic procrastination, you find a fear of failure. So procrastination might stem from that fear of failure, or from the feeling of not being good enough for something or someone. It can also be a way to avoid difficult emotions, as I said in the beginning, like free state emotions, like hopelessness, dissociation, uncomfortable sensations that might occur in relationships or that might arise when you might tackle a task. People who procrastinate also often postpone, for example, finding a new job, finding a partner, quitting a job, opening letters, starting to eat more healthy, start to go to the gym, stop with other specific behaviors. Procrastination is also quite exhausting and leads to consequences. For example, missed deadlines, to increased stress and a sense of disappointment in yourself because you never finish something, or you are never reaching your goals because you stop yourself and self-sabotage because of underlying fears. Chronic procrastination can definitely lead to a chronic sense of disappointment in yourself, and over time, therefore, you can form a loser identity because you never get things done and you're constantly disappointed of yourself. I also want to make clear that procrastination and the fear of failure are just protective behaviors and protective mechanisms here to make yourself feel more emotionally safe, but at the same time, as I said, it's self-sabotaging. So it is a protective mechanism from your nervous system. So that's a good thing again, but the consequences can lead to more difficult things and emotions, and can also probably lead to a distorted sense of your identity. Your perception of reality creates your identity, and if you are constantly perceiving that you never get things done and that you're a loser who never reaches his or her goals, then you might develop this self-image. Sign number 10, limerence and obsessive infatuation. Now, limerence and obsessive infatuation are, as I think, quite obvious and big signs for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, for emotional neglect and attachment difficulties. And if you're someone who always falls in love even before the first date, then this is definitely for you here. When you're feeling this intense experience, obsessive feelings for someone, often idealizing them and their relationship with you, then these feelings can feel all-consuming and outside of your control. And this especially happens in the first phase of dating someone. Obsessive limerence can occur already while just texting with someone you're interested in, and while feeling this, your focus is extremely on the other person. Your thoughts and emotions become heavily focused on this person, and you start neglecting other aspects of your life. There's also usually a strong desire for reciprocation and validation from them, and it's like just that you need them in your life, even if you just barely know them. It's like an addiction. This is a projection of past experiences, and your brain is creating an illusion at its finest here. For some people with CPTSD, limerence can also be a way to seek validation or to escape from emotional pain, but it's definitely important to learn to distinguish between healthy love and an unhealthy obsession you might develop out of limerence here. I made a full episode already about unmasking infatuation, which I will link you in the description below again. Limerence and obsessive infatuation definitely can be emotionally draining, so there are consequences because they disrupt your whole life. They may also disrupt your work life. They influence and infiltrate your head constantly, and it can definitely lead to unhealthy relationship patterns and codependency. And how this concept of limerence is connected with codependency, I explained in this episode about codependency and complex trauma, which I will also link you in the description below. Now, if you realized, shit, all of these 10 signs do absolutely sound like me, what can I do next? Then don't panic at first. Being aware of that you may have CPTSD is the first big step. You can definitely long-term break free from the symptoms, and you can start your healing journey now, which is, first of all, really positive, because it leads you to a more easy and fulfilled future, to better relationships, and potentially to make you reach your goals more easy and achieve more in your life. In the short term, first of all, it's important for you to learn to re-regulate your nervous system using skills and building resources to better ground yourself, which I summarized for you in our free workbook. And long term, it's definitely important to reclaim your true identity. I definitely recommend to you to, in every scenario, work with a therapist. I do therapy myself and continuously try new approaches, for example, like hypnotherapy. And if you want to start to look for a therapist, I also made a full episode about this, which I will link you up here, how you can find the perfect therapist. Some final thoughts from my side. What I think about hidden CPTSD, it's definitely extremely important to be aware that you might have these CPTSD symptoms, and that maybe the relationship problems, the attachment patterns you might experience in your life come from that. It is so important to bring those puzzle pieces together, because as soon as I did that, it was massively easier. And for me, it took me like 10 years to completely understand what's actually going on there and why I have those specific symptoms. So I know what I'm talking about here. For me, it was a realization that my relationships over a decade became shorter and shorter. And after 5 relationships, which the first one was like 3 years, and then they became shorter, and the last one was just a couple of months, then I realized, well, there might be something with my attachment style. Another indicator I had that with all of these 5 relationships, I just quit, okay? I quit all 5 of them. That's also something that made me think, well, maybe there is something with my attachment style. And then I started to have therapy, and I started to understand the dynamics that are below those relationships, and why I'm doing those specific things. And this is why I'm really pushing on this topic, because I think it's so important to finally understand and make connection between the symptoms, between your relationships, between how you emotionally react, for example, in your job, when you're with other people, and bring those things together. Now, where are you on your healing journey of CPTSD? Have you just identified that you might have CPTSD? Do you know that you have specific symptoms, or are you actually diagnosed by a psychiatrist? Definitely, if you want to share that, leave me a comment below in the comments. And if you want to support this podcast, definitely give me a like and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I see and speak to you in the next episode. Have a great day.